All right.
Do we want to let's see here. We're probably gonna you have to leave at 8:25, right?
Yeah. So we got an hour.
What do you want us to talk about specifically in this podcast? You want me to talk about Aya?
Yeah, so let me set the stage, right?
Because I don't know if I'm like super primed to that yet. But
you're what?
I'm not.
So we don't have to talk about Aya then. We don't talk about Aya. So, but what's been on my mind, and here, let me adjust the thing real quick here. What we could talk about, but this is like on my mind. I feel like it's, not to make a unilateral decision, but I feel like it still works for us. Is I've spent the last 2 weeks really reconnecting with my spirituality, which the funny thing is when I say that, it doesn't actually mean any kind of net new, but just like this idea of awakening or transcendence, it requires such an interesting state of being, like, to be like tethered to that energy, right? And I mentioned to you, it's so easy to get lost back into like egoic tendencies, get lost back into the image, into the world of constructs and labels. And like by playing it and by allowing yourself to like get caught up in the drama, which like, there's a lot of literature that says like, that's what you want to do. That's the fun part of life, and to be human, to play out the role of being human. But then like, if you just take like a step too far, you find yourself getting too caught up into the drama, and then you're a little disconnected, and then you kind of like find your way back to like find your like spiritual tether again, right? And so then I had asked you that question, like there's people, like obviously Christians go to church every Sunday, right? Ramadan happens same time every year. I mean, obviously it shifts to the calendar, but like for folks like us who have a little more of that secular style of spirituality that does draw from Orthodox, but there's like a new version that we're carrying forward. Like, what does that even mean, right? Which is why I was thinking about, like, with this being now our double digit, our 10th podcast, like as a good topic, right? With your experience with Aya being, I think, one of those modern rituals, right? That's like been exported to the West, has been, I don't want to use the word commoditized, but like in a way, yeah, like, at least in my sphere, I've seen a lot of like little retreats by God knows who, like kind of being pop up and offered. And I'm just like, who's that? Like, wait, is that guy? I know that guy. Is he really running it? Like, for real? So anyway.
Yeah, I've seen some of that too. Man, dude, I just pulled up some of the notes I wrote, 20 minutes. So I spent 20 minutes writing right after every single IA session I've ever done. So it'd be right after I, come back from the trip. Everyone's sitting around like talking about their trip. I go off into my room for 20 minutes and I just write just as fast as I can, because a lot of times when you're, from my experience from doing ayahuasca, a lot of times you have, you see too much and you don't want to forget, and there's no other way to you basically go into an experience like that, accepting the fact that you're not gonna remember like 95% of it, but even that 5% that you remember, and hopefully the 95% that you forget is inside you somewhere. But you get so much knowledge that even the 5% you remember is probably more wisdom and knowledge that you can, or more insight than you can care to do with for the next year or so. You know what I mean? So that's why I sit down and I write like all of these, just as much as I can. Imagine if you just watch like I don't know, if you got a sneak peek at like a 6-hour movie that was like the best movie ever, and you're the only one that's allowed to see it, then after the movie, someone's just like, all right, Steven, that's it, you know, go home now. And nobody, you know, you can't go on YouTube to find the movie. It's not anywhere else. It's only in your head. If you knew that was such an amazing experience, you try to write as much as you can. And it's so weird because like when you say spiritual experience, when we're talking about spiritual experiences, when we're talking about ego and stuff, obviously it's very implied that ego is such an it's a negative thing, and I guess spiritual experience, which is that something that absolves yourself of the ego? I don't know if that's correct.
I'd say in this conversation, that's where it's calibrated. Yeah.
Is ego always negative? Because I'm not sure that to be true. I think ego is a mechanism that's designed by ourselves as to help us tether into the collective. And that's not a negative thing, because in order to tether, like in order to have a shared story, like a collective story, in order for there to be society, in order for there to be families, you know, groups of people, and people like I guess like moving forward in order to exist within groups of people, whether that be like your family or like your friend group, or even bigger, your city, your nation, or your religion, or like whatever, you have to have like a collective like story about how you fit in as an individual. And the ego is almost like this automated, like, you know, over time the story gets automated. The ego, like the idea of how do I fit in? And then if somebody clashes with that story, like let's say somebody from my family is like, yo, Hack, like you're so and so, even though I don't think I am because of this, then I have to be like, no, dude, it's not what it is. This is who I am, or whatever. And so the ego is the thing that helps us like tether to the collective. Now, perhaps unawareness of the ego is the thing that's negative, like unaware that there's this automated mechanism that's gonna, you know, help us like find our place in the collective. And so we get so deep into our stories and get so negatively affected by it because we're unaware of how that mechanism works, and just unaware in general, like in the moment of things. Man, I just went on a huge ramble, man. I don't even know. I started with writing in Aya, and then I just ended up at ego.
It's funny. I texted you just earlier that I've been listening to a lot more of Third Eye Drops on my podcast, or on my runs, I should say. And, you know, after reading some, and I totally vibe with those guys, right? Like they talk a lot about things that I haven't found anywhere else. Especially they deep dive a lot into like Carl Jung's like archetypes and stuff like that. But we do our thing, man. I'm above that. I don't care. We are real ramblers. We are ranters. We are explorers. Like the conversation goes wherever it goes. So, but I really like that you actually are taking a step back a little bit and defining the substrate we're talking about and the labels, because I think that even from that sense, it's changed for me in at least in our common understanding of it. And that's something that I think is really valuable in having this conversation with you, because again, right, it's allowing us to develop it. And I would agree with everything that you said. And everything that you said, you know, if I were to replay it and summarize it in my own view, I would say that for me, that perspective of ego was like, one, very rational and a tad utilitarian, right? It's very a structural definition of what ego is. It's something that helps us collaborate. It's you know, it's a meaningful interface that other people can connect to, right? They know who Steven is. They know how to connect to him as like this, right? And there's like predictable responses from connecting to the Steven interest or API. But and it's funny also the framing of negative and positive, but I think that my view on ego has changed a little bit in that it is definitely not inherently good or bad, but if anything, I've started to view the ego in a much more positive light, because the ego is, to me, intrinsic to being human itself. It is the fact that we have a ticket to play at all is because we have an ego and because we like simulate ourselves. And while I don't want to kind of speak from too much privilege, I think at some point you have to kind of accept that no matter, once you start to deconstruct and look things really nihilistically, and even for, I think about like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, right? At some point when you decompose the human experience down, even for the person who has the most wretched life out of despair, that the fundamental atom of it is the fact that to be human in itself is a gift, right? Like there's a thing there, there's an essence of being, and that essence is this idea that you are playing out an experience, a subjective experience, unique, a blip in time to yours, and you can do something with it, even if it means fighting against like the most evil in the world, like Hitler, right? Or like an abusive parent or something. It is something like that. And so for me, it goes back to this video game analogy that I mentioned to you about. Like, to me, that metaphor continues to be very accurate, where to me, spirituality is, like you said, knowing that you're playing a video game. Spirituality is the ability to periodically log out of that video game. Maybe log out of that video game and upgrade your computer, internet speed, or whatever, and then come back in. But when you go back in and play that video game character, you have to believe that you are that character. Like when you're fighting that boss, you actually have to believe that you are like a level 23 wizard or rogue, like dodging this attack and doing that. And that's the drama of life. Like that is the thing of life. And it's a very Hindu perspective that I'm growing into, that is what you want to do. You do want to get lost into the drama. This is where, like, in the Hindu canon, and you think about the gods, right? There's a bajillion gods, and they're all like, you know, doing things to each other, pranking each other, like the way they're like kind of like positioned each other in this super matrix is what causes life to like flow and move, right? And so yeah, I think for me the ego is playing, is like when you put on a mask, you really do feel like you are, like you play into that, whatever that mask is, and you play it well, you know. Like I watch Brad Pitt on the screen. If he's not like fully into his role, then like I don't enjoy the movie as much. And if like the movie is not believable, I don't enjoy the movie. If I don't let myself believe into it, you know. And so, you know, I can either come at that movie being like, it was a freaking awesome movie. Like it was really cool that there was those zombies that then like jumped 30 feet in there and then got the main character, and then he like kicked them, you know, and won in the end. Or I could go out of the movie and be like, that was unrealistic. Oh man, movies are stupid, like whatever, right? So anyway, that's kind of my feelings on the ego as of late.
Yeah, I think I forget who, I feel like it was probably Alan Watts. I mean, he's probably somebody that's talked about this before, but he talks about how like when you go to the movies, a good movie makes you forget that you're watching a movie. And I think that's the analogy that you're speaking about here, where it's, you know, obviously like in life, like we have like these, I mean, I know we're using the word ego, and we've kind of defined what ego is. It's like this story that we have about ourselves that's so real that it makes us feel certain things when somebody, you know, like says something that crosses, that's incorrect about the story that we're telling. And it's so real that it's like, you know, like even though somebody's saying something to me, it's literally just like decibels coming out of their mouth. It's just sound. It doesn't do anything. I can just turn around and walk away. If somebody says something and it goes against, I guess, the story that I have, you know, that I believe in, the thing that I believe about hack, the thing I believe about whatever story that we're all collectively going with here, then I almost feel like this twinge in myself where I have to like defend it. I have to be like, no, that's not true. And when you're watching a movie and you know it's a movie, then you don't have to defend it. You're just kind of like, okay, well, it's just a fucking movie. Who cares? You know, you didn't like the movie. I like the movie. Like, you know, my opinion is probably just as good as yours. It doesn't matter. But in order for you to enjoy the movie, there has to be stakes in the game, and you have to kind of be like kind of like bought in, you know. And I think that's what you're talking about when you're talking about, hey, like, you know, you kind of have to forget yourself a little bit, you know, forget that you're watching a movie in order to enjoy the movie. Yeah, I mean, I really like that analogy. I know, and I know if you hit me with that analogy like maybe 10 years ago, I probably would be able to understand it intellectually, but there's no way I would be able to understand it to the degree I can now, experientially. And I'm not saying that I'm like, I've gotten to a certain point where where you know, where I'm like, you know, masterful at this or anything, but for sure in the last 10 years, like there's been development there where it's not just like, oh shit, like it's like I understand the analogy because I've been able to see myself in the last 10 years, you know, forget that I'm in a movie, and then remember that I'm in a movie, and then kind of like have the positive or negative results based on that. And when I say positive, obviously that's subjective, but more so, I guess for reference, if I say positive and negative, I mean like whether or not you're enjoying life or whether or not you're like suffering through it. So just to give us a gauge of what that means.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll affix my own personal thing to the negative piece that you mentioned, because I've been looking at things, you know, through a very like quasi composite Buddhist lens, which is like, you know, in that framework, the only negative is attachment, right? And well, and then obviously not adding things that other people are likely to attach to. But I think back, and again, I think I'm kind of moving forward a little bit of my own personal questions for our conversation here, which is so obviously there's like a ton of like super popular philosophy, like ancient orthodox philosophies coming forward, right? That, you know, the West is kind of parsing through, and we talk about Buddhism, we talk about Hinduism, and then there's Stoicism. And by and large, right, like the export has been on the back of this message that says like, oh, we're going to teach you how to be more responsive rather than reactive. We're going to teach you how to be more calm rather than emotional. We're going to teach you how to be more rational, right? We're going to teach you how to not be too into your ego. But I've been struggling with what feels like giving up too much of the ego almost, right? Like not like still being inside of your ego, not partnering with your ego, not like boosting your ego. And what's been really intriguing to me, and I mentioned this in one of our last podcasts, like Zen in particular, Zen Buddhism, that Japanese brand of Buddhism in particular, is being, I think, very interesting or intriguing to me in the way that it kind of just like sheds a lot of that need to be like composed. Like there's this quote I when you were talking, I was thinking about it, I pulled it up here from Alan Watts in one of his books, where he says like people have lots of preconceived notions about mystics, Buddha, sages, and so on. They often imagine them as having no emotions. But when a Zen master gets angry, they get so angry that the room rattles. The difference is that when the anger is past, it's over, it's gone. It's the same way with children. They can flare up and scream, but the whole thing vanishes. People think that holy people should have more control over themselves, show little emotion, and be completely serene and placid. Rubbish. Some people would prefer a stone Buddha to a living one. They bang away as a saint and see how long it takes them to scream. But of course, a saint isn't supposed to scream. And if you don't scream, then you win. And yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. Like, can I, and especially if I want to, quote unquote, play the game, change the world, like from within, like be a part of the system, but also influence it. Like, obviously you and I can go boot off and do retreats all the time and become like crunchy, like hobo types and vagabonds. But, we want to kind of like do the middle way and like make people's lives better. If, as we're playing into that game, are there moments where we should just be like, yeah, I'm fucking angry and I'm going to like ignite a bomb right now so everyone feels like the severity of that anger, like that matches it. And that what, like, but the dissipation, is that really what the lesson is? Like, as Alan Watts said, like, what do we do with that? How do we expertly wield that, our ego in a way, in our emotions? So
that's a big question. I like that quote. Can you make sure to send that to me later?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think man, it's so weird because it, like, how the mind always like binary, almost on a binary level, decides that something's positive and negative, and obviously talking about something as complex as the ego, is like it wants to do that. It wants to be like, oh, positive or negative. But obviously it's a huge gradient and there's like a whole lot in between. And I don't think either you or I would have gotten to the point in our lives that we've gotten to without our own personal egos. I don't think anyone can. How would you function in society without one? But then I mean, it's not a binary thing. Like, man, I want to go back. So I want to tell a story, but there's a lot of context, so I'm not going to do it till later. Probably save it for the Aya podcast. But long story short, when I was on Aya, I saw my ego go away, and then I was, I guess, like egoless or ego death or whatever you want to call it for a decent amount of time on this for like the whole night when I was on Aya. But then towards the end of that night, my ego came back, and I came to the conclusion that night that I need my ego, like not as like people. I think when people people talk about ego death and people talk about like that type of stuff, like getting rid of your ego as if it was like a huge positive thing. I think perhaps it might be, I know I'm using the words positive and negative, but I feel like it could be positive more in the sense that once you're able to get rid of your ego just one time, then you have more awareness of your ego. But I think you need it. And I think it needs to come back at some point in order for you to function in society. And without it, it's going to be really hard for you to, like, if you weren't Steven, then I wouldn't be able to kind of like understand almost like I think what you said earlier, it's a meaningful interface that allows others to connect with us. I wouldn't be able to connect with you if you weren't like, oh yeah, this is my friend Steven. If I was just like, yo, this is this dude I know, he's egoless. You know what I mean? It'd be really hard for me to, bring you around and put you at work or put you at home with your family and stuff like that. And then so I think that night I concluded that we needed our egos, but I don't think it's all, people always view it that way. People always view like, oh, we need to lose our egos. I think we need to be aware of our egos. So perhaps the ego death thing, like your entire life, you've never been egoless without, like from assuming that you haven't had an experience to make you egoless, like a spiritual experience where you're literally just like, I don't know, like tripping on a lot of acid or something like that. Like for as long as you can remember, maybe babies are egoless before they form the identity of themselves and like the idea of who they are and what that means to the people around them. But I don't think anyone, I think that goes back so far that you wouldn't even remember the time prior to your ego forming. And once the ego forms, you see the world through that lens, like until you die, for most people. And so like, it's almost like you go through life with sunglasses on, and your ego is that lens, the sunglasses, and you've never taken off the sunglasses before, so you don't know that you're wearing sunglasses. And so when you have an experience like such as ego death, or let's say you take psychedelics and the lens comes off a little bit, that's the first time that you're aware that you're wearing sunglasses. And I think the awareness of the ego is what makes it so that life experience doesn't have to always be suffering if you understand that there's like, oh shit, it's just the ego. I'm watching a movie, and the movie is I'm playing the character of Hack, when times get bad or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. It's really interesting to me because I think what I'm extracting a little bit out of this is there's been notable figures in life, both famous or like, famous like universally, or just locally like famous. Like, when my dad tells me stories of my grandpa, and like, God, the stories of my grandpa, he sounds like a perfect like saint, kind of saint. But like the difference between people who are just like natural Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, right? Like they didn't do this whole ego thing, deconstruction. They didn't like go into any kind of religion. They just are naturally like secure in their ego and themselves, imperturbable, live a whole life of just like waking up, doing my honest goodness, like for my community, for myself, whatever, going to sleep, rinse, repeat. Nothing needs more to be said. And so I think there's actually ample work within just being the ego, in the ego, like just being secure and knowing that like, yeah, like, oh, this is an external thing. This is my ego's reaction, without getting out of the ego, if you will. And that's a really interesting spot for me too. Because it feels like there's a lot there already. And then to your point of like, then maybe stepping back from the ego, that's like even another like absolving. But it's also like, in a way, it's like a so what, like once I've like recognized it, it's not as much as I can do sometimes. Because sometimes the strength of the feelings or the strength of the egoic reaction, that is a compass and a guide too, right? Like, I can read about a crime that happened, and it can be so horrific that I get hurt, I get angry, I get disgusted, I get like this really like, this shot, this weight, this cut. And I can know that like, okay, I'm one person, it's not for me to solve the whole world's problems. This is actually like something I would have never known if modern news didn't like let me download this story from wherever it happened. But in that moment, like I am almost like reaffirming a principle, like my feeling of good versus bad, my individual, like what I feel like my individual mission against like quote unquote like villainy might be, but it's still like an egoic thing. You know, versus like I can like be much more nihilistic about it and just be like, oh, you know, bad shit happens in the world. It's like, but it seems like there's not as much as I can do with that. So, and it might be like a really small distinction. It might be like a bit of a nitpick, but a nuance. But I don't know. Yeah, again, like there's always this risk that the stuff that you and I do like love to talk about and talk to other people about is at the end of the day just navel gazing, to use that word, where you're just it doesn't actually go anywhere.
Well, let's go back to the question I'd like to ask then. So let me frame this next question. I don't have an answer, and I'm not sure if you do either, but I would like to hear what you think. So, okay, so the question we'd like to ask is, so what? So we know all this shit about what we think the ego is, the mechanism of the ego, a general idea of how it kind of works. Maybe it works that way, maybe it doesn't, but it's probably more accurate than not knowing anything at all. And so the answer is, so what? Can't. And then specifically, I think the question I'm curious about is, okay, so the ego is so powerful at affecting our actions, affecting our emotions, overall affecting our life experience and probably the life experience of everyone around us. I mean, and it does this without effort. It's like once you believe something about the ego, like without effort, if somebody started arguing with me, unless I'm effortful and I'm like, you know what, like this is just the ego thing, I'm just gonna walk away. If I just let myself go down that road, then I can escalate that shit without trying. Basically, I can literally just lose myself in that argument if I wanted to. And sometimes I do, and afterwards I'm like, oh shit, I probably shouldn't have done that. Now, knowing what we know about the ego, my question is, this thing that affects our life experience so much, the life experience of everyone around us, and you know, all that stuff, can we purposely mold our ego to have a better life? Like, can we affect that thing that we call ego in a way, because it's such an unconscious motivation that clearly affects everything that we experience? Is there a way, knowing the mechanism by how this works, that we can kind of like, I don't know, like the story of Hack or the story of Steven or the story of whatever, can we make that something that's like, can we consciously be like, oh, I think I want Hack to be, the idea of Hack, I want that to be a guy that's courageous or so-and-so or like whatever. And then over time, that affects my actions, that makes me courageous, that makes me whoever. And if we can do that, how do we do that?
Yeah. My short answer to it, and it's not a position that I've yet been able to articulate and defend, but my answer to that is yes, and it leans very much on the law of attraction type stuff, right? There's multiple interpretations to any given stimuli that presents itself, right? Like I can, like, you know, you can look at a tiger, you both of us can look at a tiger, you can look at a tiger and see it as like, holy shit, this is terrifying. Like, you know, this is like beast, this animal is gonna, you know, it represents anti-civilization. Remember, so the wild nature is gonna kill me. But I look at tiger, it's like, that, that's an inspiring like symbol icon of like fear and strength and courage, whatever. And you know, oh, it's a beautiful animal, it's a predator, right? And yeah, and I think that almost certainly, because we forget that this substrate around us, right, is one that we conjure up in our minds. Like we think these are like material things, but this is actually emotional meaning content. Like it's red, it's white, it's circle, right? This is impossible not for me not to, like, there's so much embedded meaning in everything. even as mundane and innocuous as you might think it is. And I think that if you can like intentionally choose to see things in a certain way that you deem more meaningful and valuable and aligned to principle, you know, it's so trite. It's so trite, right? But glass is half full versus glass is like half empty. You choose to see like what's there rather than what's lacking, what's good rather than what's bad. And you can change it. You know, I think the interesting thing is that, like, you know, using an example of like us having a bunch of Lego blocks. Like, okay, so someone gave me a Lego kit in my hand, and now I'm going to start building and piecing things together. And in my mind, I think that what I'm building is the actual final form, because we are creatures of form. But what I don't realize is that I can actually change the Lego blocks themselves. Like if I need a different type of Lego block that didn't come, that had, you know, instead of like a 4x4, I need like a 4x8. I can actually do that, find that piece, like, you know, look, like change that piece. So it's like change the color of it. And I can change both, like the things I'm building with and the thing itself. And that's actually what your ego is, right? Your ego is something that whole strange self-referential loop. Like we simulate ourselves, and it's like you just have to find the insertion points around the whole continuous circle. It's not cause and effect, right? It's not linear. It's a recursive loop. So yeah, I think so. I think my answer to that would, the short answer would be yes. It's very much the law of attraction stuff. And I guess the final word is also to go back to a little bit of the scientific perspective. When you were saying this is the first thing that came to mind, like neuroplasticity is a thing, right? And you don't know what you don't know. And you look at people who, I mean, for example, like there was a period in my life in college where we were partying and socializing stuff. And like, I would smoke cigarettes, right? Like you go out for a night, someone goes, hey, you want to grab a cigarette? Got it. And like, that was the easy thing, right? It's so easy, consumption. And I couldn't imagine, there was a world where I was like, I couldn't imagine not like wanting craving one. Like I quit, and every time it came up, I was like, oh man, like I have to exert effort to not. But through practice, right, through realignment of my values, principles, through repeated reps, like I'm now in a state where I don't even think about it at all, like at all. And I'm sure you certainly, you know, I haven't seen you binge on like fast food or ice cream or candy or any of stuff like that. Can you explain that? Well, no, it's just becomes nature now. It's become in your nature. So I think that, you know, we are both like, yeah, the sculptor and the sculpture. We can change it in ways that we can't even fathom, so long as we you know, just keep kind of chipping away and pressing against like where we want to be. So it seems to me.
I like that. We're both a sculptor and sculpture. Keep chipping away at where we want to be. Man, I had this thing I wanted to ask, but it was there and then it's gone, and that's fine because that happens all the time.
You know, I would love to have a better understanding too of like, from a physiological or a neuropsychological perspective, what is that thing when a thought gets put into like a holding cell, and like the next batter to batting cage, and then he's like, all right, you're up, and he's gone. It's like, whoa, gone. Like, you know, it's like, oh, the guy just booted off. He just like didn't want to play today.
No, it happens to me. It happens to me a decent amount of time. Like I don't know if I notice it more now, or if I guess know more things as I get older, so stuff just, you know, doesn't get stored as easily. and obviously I'm sure my brain's just like trying to be more efficient or whatever. Maybe it happens more than I am aware of, but I just notice the times when I meant to say something and I don't have it there. But I know exactly what happened though. Like I was gonna say something, and then you said that I think you had like a lead in few sentences, and then you said we're both the sculptor and sculpture, keep chipping away at where we want to be. And I was like, man, that's a cool quote. I'm gonna write this down so I don't forget it. And then so that probably got placed into the holding cell or the memory block of what I was holding to say. And then I forgot the first thing, but I remember the second thing, which is +1 -1, which is not terrible.
Yeah, it's so true, and it's skill. I mean, it's actually, I think it's one of the most important skills you can have in this day and age, because most meaningful change actually happens like in a group of people talking, right, collectively. And isn't it weird how like 8 people can come together, hold a meeting? I mean, as much as meetings get made fun of, like they are one of the core drivers or like machines of of humans, right? And like somehow a decision gets made, like, you know, people get their own little delegated duties, an overall feeling or decision gets made and people go off. And when you examine or sit into those meetings, they're so interesting because like it's a ball that gets passed around and you're following the ball, and every time someone sticks a different thing on the ball and you're like, man, what am I want to stick on the ball, and do I want to call for the ball, like what am I going to stick on it and throw to the next person, or am I even going to throw it, or like I'm going to wait for someone to raise their hand and then I'll throw it. You know, it's something that, you know, in college I got a lot of practice in by virtue of being an English major, because that's what we did. We just sat around like, you know, doing that. But I think it's such a vocational skill. Like it's a level, it's like a level upable skill, like that we should talk about more explicitly, it feels like, and we don't. You know, like I feel like when I have a kid, I'm going to explain it exactly like that. Like, hey, you're going to go into life where you're going to be like in a group of people, and I want you to like practice being able to like influence the group of people.
Talking in a group setting is so much different than talking in a one-on-one setting.
Yeah,
it's like not even close.
Not even close. And it's also not a linear, like n for n number of people,
right?
Like when you add another person, it just shoots like up, you know.
Right. Yeah, it's not even close. I should think more about talking in groups of people. I feel like that's a skill that, like you're saying, should get developed, but it probably doesn't as much. Usually in those like I guess in high school we had those English literature circle, literary circles or whatever, where you're forced to say at least one thing, and that's your grade. I was always bad at that, so I would literally just like kind of like be like, oh shit, what am I gonna say? And obviously like go through all my notes and like load up one comment, hope no one says this one generic comment that I probably found, and then when it comes to my turn, I'll just be like da 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 da, and hopefully I get my participatory, you know, trophy for that session. But definitely wasn't a natural thing, and it feels more forced. It's more like I'm doing this for the grade. It's an external motivator to get you to do something, but a lot of times those aren't the things that get you to do it like correctly anyway. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like if there was like an internal motivation, it's like, hey, everyone has their own perspective, so it's so interesting if we actually share what we actually think, our opinions and stuff like that. Then we understand our perspectives better, and perhaps other people understand our perspectives better as well, and then everybody has a better understanding overall. Then maybe that would have been a nicer motivator to participate in a group setting as opposed to just doing it because I don't want to get a bad grade and fail and not be able to get into good college and lose that life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting because I going back to the so what, and you know, I naturally always think about how to make these things more practical, but it's interesting because it's hard for me to not hold like verbal speech to a type of higher standard or higher level. you know, I've been very sensitive to your point right now, because a lot of the conversation right now in corporations and governments and groups and organizational stuff is like, how do you create space that is inviting for all types of people, minds and viewpoints, right? Like even that introverted person over there who, I mean, but maybe their expression, right, is not like speech. Maybe their expression or contribution is different. But at the same time, though, speech is, again, the only meaningful interface that we have. And you need to be able to play in the place that most people are playing, right? Which is why I struggle with this shift towards like hyper specificity of people's like lived experiences. Like, oh, I can't speak, you can't speak to that because that's like that one's person's narrow perspective. We should honor and respect that thing. But at the same time, you've got to come play with the same pieces. And there's nothing more than speech. Like there's nothing more than it's, you know, again, looking back to the perspective, if I had my own kid, could be born, could have the most introverted, like speech averse kid, and I would have to say, like, look, this is uncomfortable. I'm gonna have to challenge you on this. But we need to practice your ability to do the talking game. Otherwise, it's just gonna suck, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
and so I'm gonna tangent.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna tangent off just this one thing that my thought went to first when you started talking, but and I think it's something that I feel like is unique in my friends, you certainly, is that we have like one foot in the side of like rational, like, you know, logical discourse, but then like we also have a good feeling, understanding of like rhetoric and showmanship and how all of those things need to come together. I think a lot about like growing up through high school. What was very influential for me was watching the bully kids bully and make fun of other kids, and just seeing, like, watching the victim try to defend themselves but like do it badly, or like put up a valiant effort, and you're just like, you know, the noble part of you is like, yes, that is the right thing, and then like the bully makes like one joke and it just shatters like everything, and everyone laughs, and you're just like, oh my god, like, damn, that's not the move, like, you know. And then it's like, and then you just have to like rise a meta level above that and try to put together like, okay, so it has to be like, it can't just always, it's not always about accuracy, it's also about like this and this. And I think, you know, obviously Trump kind of was someone who took this to the max, like full rhetoric and bullying. But I almost feel like we need to somehow unite those worlds, unify them. Maybe that's the lesson we give to our kids to like best move through this world. But I don't know, I have people on both sides of the fence that I'm just like, you need to come in the middle. It's like
words are like a magical spell. I mean, if you think about it, in a situation where there's a bully and like, let's say like a much smaller dude that probably can't, you know, physically defend himself against a bully. If that smaller dude is super witty, then he can just spout some decibels out of his mouth in a setting with a lot of people and then not get his ass beat. And not only not get his ass beat, but make the bully like physically feel inferior. You know, if he like makes fun of him in a manner where everyone laughs at him, you know, maybe the bully might still attack the little dude, but that mental, you know, anguish is gonna hurt the bully probably more in the long run than, you know, than a beat down will hurt like the kid. But a lot of times, like, you know, if you're just witty enough, like if you think about it, if you got the words and you got the speech and you're able to deliver that shit in a manner where people were like, damn, he's right. You know what I mean? Now you got a whole group of people that I don't want to use the word brainwashed, but like you've kind of like affected the way they view things. So now they're on your side and they're against that one dude. And so if you think about it, words are magic. You know what I mean? And not just words are magic used talking to people, but perhaps words are magic in the way that they affect you too, the words that you let affect yourself. And maybe that's why now we live in a day where people are like, oh shit, cancel culture. So like if words are, I don't know if anyone accepts the fact that words are magic, but you know, that's what I'm gonna go with. Words are very powerful. So we have to be careful what we allow people to say. You say something wrong, I'm gonna cancel your ass real quick. And I don't know if I agree with that, obviously, because I do think over time things like, it's like a pendulum, right? It's like, you know, like when we were like kids, like it was all the way on one side. You say whatever the fuck you want, and then now it's kind of like to the other side, and it's kind of like, all right, if you say like this, and this, and someone catches it on their iPhone, then you're gonna lose your job. And perhaps some things like that make sense, but I think sometimes not all the things. But it's gonna be a pendulum. And I think it's always just gonna do that thing and correct itself, and that's how you end up like in the middle. You know, it's but yeah.
Yeah. No, 100%, 100%. I'd say you're spot on with all that. I think that society at large is saying that words are magic, even if they're not using those exact words. They are everything that they're expressing. They're saying that. Yeah, lots of jumping off points there. Yeah, social media is interesting because it feels, people treat it like a monolith, like it's one thing, but it's not. And that like the words are magic thing, and I think the crusade is not the right word, but you know, the cancel stuff, right? It's interesting because at a certain point, like you are an adult, right? And it doesn't matter what words people use and what like I feel like internalized oppressions, like you should like have caught up to a degree, right, in adulthood. I think that's whatever the span of like human span of life, like, you know, it's like you ask like 100 people to put a dot where you think like that threshold is for like secure adulthood, secure ego, self-esteem. It has to be somewhere. There has to be a point where you're just like, sorry, that after this point you're an adult, you're strong, you know. So I think that sometimes like this current social media discourse can feel infantilizing, if that, how to pronounce that, because I think where it goes wrong is that it continues to treat adults like kids. Now, don't get me wrong, adjusting the mainstream so that what our kids start to download implicitly is very important because they don't have a say. And we were a product of that. So that's why we can help change it. But like that should not carry on too far into when adults are in the picture, because at that point you should be like more equipped. It feels like to me. So personal hot take, but words are magic, man. Words are magic for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting when you watch like narratives clash on social media. It's just like this it's almost like like this stage like where these gladiators are like, you know, fighting with words, and I rarely participate in that stuff. In fact, I would go as far as to say as I probably never get into like Facebook. You know, like I don't know, you probably have people on your news feed where somebody posts something and then 52 comments later, like they're still going back and forth. And usually when I see that, I mean, it's super enjoyable for me because like, you know, I'm just reading the comments. I'm like, damn, that's a good point. And then that person gets more likes, but then the other person makes like an even better point and they get a certain number of likes too. And whoever kind of like gets more likes and more people on their side kind of like, I guess like wins that little debate. But it seems to me that a lot of times people get so caught up into that. Now, I've never let myself get caught up into that, but perhaps I should if we were trying to like, we're talking about like, you know, like losing yourself or forgetting that you're in a movie. I don't know. I've never participated in that type of thing, online at least. But maybe I should.
Yeah, try it out, man. Dip your toes in it. I can't say the same. I participate in a shit ton of those. God, man. Like even back in the days when I played World of Warcraft, I would be like writing long essays, like defending like mage class and the balance and the meta state of shit. Like when I was really like following the 49ers and into football, I would like post these long posts on like our NFL or our 49ers. Like, you know, it's just, it's funny. It's fun to look back on. And again, it's like, again, if you can, I think that going back to like where we started from, for me, it feels like the fundamental wisdom in all of this, like, is almost like if you want to, if it, you know, or like wherever it's like, it, it, it draws you in to like, yeah, like go have those arguments, but then like be able to laugh about it, right? The like laughing to me is like the most sage thing that exists, bar none. Like it just represents an acceptance, an acknowledgement of the absurdity of like what life is that it actually is one giant joke. Like it is, you could, if you like just open your mind, and back to what you mentioned about like psychedelics and Aya, like if you just like start to open up the mind, there's like a floodgates of just fucking shit hitting you of like all that life is and how like the ridiculousness, all of it, and you just have to laugh. Otherwise, there's no way you're gonna be able to do any like make sense of up or down or move through any kind of consequential way without being able to laugh in an intellectual way, like not laughing in a shallow way, like in a deep like a deep laugh.
It's hard to get that many layers deep without, I don't know, I guess experience would be too general a word, but that's what I'm going, you know what I mean? Like it's like to be able to get that deep where you're laughing at it, just some shit, you're like, oh wow, this is all just a fucking game.
Yeah.
Oh my god, dude, I don't even know how much ayahuasca that would take. But yeah, you're right. I mean it is a game, and I think having awareness around that makes the game more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Or I guess maybe some people might argue having less awareness around that and losing yourself into it perhaps makes the game more enjoyable. I mean, that's, I guess it depends on how you define enjoyable.
Yeah, and it also depends on, I think, like your natural disposition. You know, at the end of the day, like you can't get too far from the genetics you have, like the mind that you have, the cards you're dealt. Like I think a lot about it's really weird, right? Because we oftentimes, whether we're in the spiritual world or, you know, when I talk about my fight world, you know, and it's so like, oh, it's about the story you tell yourself, like, oh, you know, those are just labels, like whatever. But at the same time, there's like too much value in me like putting a label on certain things. Like I have ADHD, right? And I'm always like meaningful, like very mindful when I say that, those 4 letters, whether I say it to myself or other people, I read about it, and I'm just like, but no amount of like not calling it for what it is makes me not have that. Like over, there's enough data, enough time that like these are my impulses, these are my behaviors. Like I can't like think my way out of it. I can manage it, I can like drop in and out, but like over term, there's no like, no one cures like psychosis or any of these like afflictions of the mind just by meditating their way out of it, right? And in meditation circles, they talk about that. Like you can go into meditation with Adderall. Like it's not a big deal, you know, do what you need to do. Like, but yeah, I don't know. I lost my point. But basically it's just say like, it's just this middle line is just really interesting to me of like saying, yeah, that's what I got. Oh, this is why I brought the ADHD. I brought it up because there's so many times where one of the ways I think get that cosmic laugh is because with ADHD, it's like a constant battle. Like every moment is a battle against like society. Like it's like being on time, making sure that like it's like you're never off with ADHD, right? You always have responsibilities and people and things you have to do. And sometimes I just like don't do anything to see what happens. Like, oh, I'm just gonna let that deadline. I'm like, I'm just not gonna care about like, and I'm just like, oh shit, nothing like, like I just watch what happens if I don't do anything. And especially now that I work at a big company, right? Where my project is like, hundreds of people moving, and I'm just like, what if I don't do anything for a week? Anyway.
You try that shit. Let me know how it goes on the next episode of the podcast.
Yeah. Steven does nothing.
That's pretty funny.
But it makes you laugh. Like, I guess those are going back to laugh, because then in the moments where I've done this, I just let go. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna drop my oar. I'm gonna take my hands off the handlebars. I'm just gonna like, fuck it. Let's see what happens. And you just laugh because you've been trying so hard. You're like trying. But yeah.
You think fuck, if I start asking, I mean, we don't have that much time left because I know you got work soon, and
Yeah.
unless you want to test out that not do anything for a week type of shit. But let's cut it here, and then we can I don't want to open up another can of worms. Yeah, let's cut it.
Let's cut it.
All right, I'm gonna pause the recording or stop the recording.